So welcome everyone to another Launch Talks. It's just an awesome day to be connecting with everyone once again, albeit virtually one more time. But excited to have David Pollendine here, who's one of our launch members, and he's going to share with us a topic that he's very passionate about, which is protecting the poor from violence during COVID-19. And so I'm really excited to hear more about that, David. And so before you get going, David, for all of our members, not everyone gets a chance, especially now, to see each other in person. But when we do get back there, I'd really love to know a little bit more about yourself, why you use Launch and what you see, what's the most valuable thing about Launch to you. And then also the last thing is, what should someone approach you about? What's your passion so that we can engage in conversations if we're back in person again? So David, go for it from there.
So why Launch? Well, I came to Winnipeg 3 years ago from UK, from London, England. And I started working for IGM pretty much straight away in the prairies. And I worked for about a year and a half in my basement, maybe almost 2 years in my basement. Now, I'm an extrovert by nature. I find it very hard just being on my own in that context. So when I discovered Launch, it was a real game changer for me. I think attrition might have stopped me from continuing working in that context, but certainly I just need to be in a room with people. I don't even need to talk to people, but just being in the room, having people around me. Obviously there's things on tap like coffee and beer, but I stick to the coffee. But no, it just makes the day much easier. It means you can leave your workplace in the workplace when you go home. I've got 2 children, a 10-year-old son and a 13-year-old girl. So I want to be able to focus on them when I go home, really, and my wife. So yeah, that's been a great discovery for me, finding Launch.
Great. Well, that's a common trait that most members share. Now, when we see you again in person, what should members be engaging you about? You have a favorite beer. You mentioned some travel, some history in Prague. Share a little bit about what we can chat about you outside of the business.
Yeah, well, I've got a few friends on the call here. We lived in Prague together. I was there for about 10 years, and both Ben and Katie, who are on the call, both speak Czech. We all speak Czech. We had to learn it. And yeah, we spent many years there together. So you can talk to me. Anything about Czech is very interesting. Obviously, Steve Setkar, we know this, Ben, Setkar se, Setkarny is meeting in Czech. He meets Setkar se. So we can see that Steve Meeting is Steve's name. He's got a Czech influence there as well. So I'm always alert to that. The other thing is, I'm a typical English boy. I love football or soccer. I was brought up playing, and I'm coaching now here in Winnipeg. So I love soccer and I love theatre. People might not know about that, but I've got a bit of a drama background as well. Ran a theatre company in England for about 10 years. So that's also a bit of a passion as well. Yeah.
Great. Well, David, appreciate that introduction, and I'll let you take the rest of the call from here and sharing your screen and telling us about what you're going to tell us about today.
Lovely. So let me do that first. I'm going to share the screen just so that I've got the technology working for me. We can all see that, can't we? Yeah. Lovely. So welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate that. So some of you know me, my name is David Pollendine, and my job title is Director of Development and Mobilization for IJM in Canada. And my sort of area of working is the prairies, which covers pretty much Manitoba and Saskatchewan. In this presentation, what I hope to do is I'll start with a story which kind of helps you to see a little bit of the challenge of why we have IJM. And then I'll look at who we are and what we do, and then how COVID-19 has affected our work and how we have had to respond to that. I'll then finish with looking at how Canadians can join in, partner with us in this work in different ways.
Hey, David, just a small technical note. I don't know what everyone else is seeing, but we're seeing your preview screen instead of the slide itself. It's probably because you may be using 2 screens.
Yes. Okay.
Just see if there's a way.
Let me unplug the other screen and see if that helps.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be on 2 screens.
David, if you move that one over to your second screen, it probably will work. That's usually what I do.
Oh, I've unplugged that screen now. Does that help? Can you see the slide?
Maybe
Let me unshare.
Unshare and then try again. Yeah.
Yeah, let's try this. Is it still the same?
Still the same for me.
Gosh, I can see it without a problem, but let me close my PowerPoint and open it again.
Sure.
Okay, I can see what's happened here. Maybe this, okay. Okay, this might work because there were two things up there. Okay, this should work. How's that?
There we go. Perfect.
Fantastic. Lovely. Okay. So I want to start actually with the story, and it's of a girl called Gina. Let me get her picture up. There we are. So Gina is a young girl. She's about 16 years old, and she's from Kenya in Africa. And she lived in a village, a poor village in the countryside, with her parents and her sisters. And growing up, she would love to make little dolls out of potatoes and peppers and dress them up. So she was pretty much a typical girl. She could be from anywhere. Many children in the village obviously were able to go to school, but they had to walk for several miles, and that was quite common. One day, Gina was walking to school on her own, and a taxi driver on a motorcycle attacked her and raped her. Now, Gina carried on to school, and she never told anybody about what had happened. And people noticed also that she'd stopped speaking. She lost her voice. And after a short time, she stopped going to school and dropped out. She was dealing with trauma, basically. She was paralyzed by the trauma of the event. So the poor are vulnerable because their justice systems in the developing world, the police, the courts, and the laws don't protect them from violence or violent people. So if you've got no money to get a lawyer, there's no justice. If you've got no money to pay for proper counselling, there's no care. This one event would stop Gina and every single girl from the village going to school. They would not get an education, and so they would be stuck in their poverty. And so violence stops development from happening. Violence keeps people in poverty. So here's some quite alarming statistics, but the UN has estimated that 4 billion people, that's like 2/3 of the planet, 4 billion people live outside the protection of the law. And 1 billion women and children suffer from sexual and physical violence. 1 in 5 girls are sexually abused at least once in their lifetime. And over 40 million people are held in slavery. Quite alarming statistics. There is no 911 basically for these people. You know, we take it for granted we can reach out and just dial 911. They just don't have that option. So let's look at the beginning of IGM, how we were founded. So basically, 1997, we were founded by a guy called Gary Haugen. He was a lawyer living in Washington, DC. And he'd experienced firsthand the injustice and atrocities that were being committed during the Rwandan genocide. And he served there as the director of United Nations Genocide Investigation. Haugen began to ponder what might be possible if you actually collaborated and brought together investigators, lawyers, and aftercare professionals in their own countries to bring about protection for the poor and for those who are being violently oppressed. And so out of this, IGM was founded. In Canada, we founded in 2002, and we are what's called a partner office. So there are a number of other partner offices like the UK and Australia. And what we do is raise awareness and raise money for the field offices. We have about 1,000 staff worldwide. And as you see, 96% of our staff are actually from the country where they work. So who are we? Well, IGM is a global organization that partners with governments and local organizations to protect the poor, protect people in poverty or the poor from violence. What do we mean by violence? Well, it can be anything from human trafficking, sex trafficking, forced labor, slavery, police abuse of power, citizen rights abuse, property theft, violence against women and children. It's the low-level violence that people in poverty experience on a daily, every day. Or if they don't experience it, they fear that they would experience it. Where do we work? We work across 4 continents in 19 different locations. And most recently, the office that opened was in actually Romania, in Bucharest, in Romania. And what do we do? Well, we have what we call a transformational model. We work with local government, we work with local police, with lawyers, and with aftercare professionals. And we rescue and restore with the police. We rescue victims of violence. We then work with aftercare professionals in the country to restore survivors. And then we work with the criminal justice system to bring criminals to justice. And our end goal is really to strengthen and rebuild the justice system in that country so it protects its citizens, and especially the poor. So back to Gina's story. Thankfully, Gina her case was picked up by IGM, and we took on her also trauma care for her, proper trauma-informed counselling. We also were able to collect evidence against this taxi driver, and thankfully he was arrested and convicted to 10 years in prison. Gina started to speak again, which was good because she was actually a comedian, and I mean she had a real gift of the gab and was a very funny girl. And then she also went back to school once she started to get through the trauma care. She's since, as you can see, she's since qualified as a hairstylist in a salon, and is also a youth leader in her church. And she really wants to help other girls in her situation. The thing we learned from Gina is that when you properly support these victims of violence with trauma-informed care, and you go after the perpetrator, so that the victim is in no fear of ever being, of being attacked again. The victim doesn't just survive, but they can actually flourish. And other victims start to believe then that they can get justice, and that criminals start to fear that they might get caught. We've seen this time and time again in IGM, that when you enforce the law, the violence stops. So the end of impunity basically is the end of violence. It really does work. And over time, over years, it takes years, the justice system improves as we walk with victims through the pipeline of justice again and again. And we can deal, as we go along with that individual, we can deal with each challenge as we meet it until the pipeline is eventually fixed. Now, as an example of that was in Uganda. I had the opportunity to go to Uganda last year, or actually the year before, to visit our field office there, and they deal with property theft of widows and orphans. When they lose their husband, often the family comes in, or the community, and just takes the property off them, and they're left landless. So I got to visit the court systems there and visit the field and the people, the widows who had been rescued. And so one of the issues in their court system wasn't necessarily because of a lack of money, but it was just the way that things happened, was the way that they used to keep the case files. So if you came to the court for a case file, you pretty much couldn't find it. It would take months to find, and you'd always be offered, you'd have to pay for a bribe. So many people in poverty couldn't even afford to go forward because they couldn't afford the bribe. So this is what happened. We managed to get a group of people over who were professional organizers, and they changed the court filing system from the one on the left to the one on the right. You can straight away see how that would benefit and speed up the process. It literally, we had an example. A laptop had simple software, and it just connected to each file, and the guy literally found the case file within 2 minutes. What had taken months now took minutes. So it's these kind of things that we have to iron out as you go through the justice system, as you go through the pipeline of justice with individuals. I think to kind of visualize what I'm talking about, I've got a little video that I hope will work. So I'm going to play that, and that will just give you a bit of insight into some of the things that I've been sharing. So let's just watch this for a couple of minutes. So before we go on and look at the impact of COVID-19, I just want to share a case study from the Philippines, which we carried out in 2006 to tackle the pandemic of sex trafficking in the Philippines. So basically, it was in 2006 we set out to test a powerful concept: when laws are enforced, children are protected from sex traffickers. Could IGM measurably prove the impact that rescue, restoration, restraint and representation, so this transformational model, was having to protect the poor from violence? Could justice systems actually transform to protect the poor from violence? So we had funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We called the project Project Lantern. And we wanted to test whether IGM had a measurable impact in Metro Cebu in the fight against commercial sexual exploitation of children. So we began in 2006 and we partnered with the local government of Cebu, IGM lawyers, social workers and investigators in providing training to police and prosecutors, assisting law enforcement with rescue operations, helping local organizations to strengthen victim aftercare and representing the clients in court. Minors available for a sale in commercial sex trade was the title, and we set an ambitious goal of what we thought 20% reduction in minors available for sale in the commercial sex trade over a 4-year period. However, in 2010, so 4 years later, independent researchers found a staggering 79% reduction of children being sold for sex in Metro Cebu. They also found an increased response and commitment to resolving sex trafficking cases in the justice system, as well as increased victim services like shelter and counselling. So it turns out that sex traffickers are not brave, and once you start sending them to jail, they start to leave the children alone. So by changing the fear equation so that the traffickers begin to fear the consequences of the law, they soon realized that it was no longer worth the risk of abusing children. If there was a likelihood they'd go to jail, and a life sentence means 40 years in the Philippines. The same program was replicated in Manila, where we saw a 70% reduction. In Pampanga, also in the Philippines, we saw an 86% reduction. And it was also carried out across Cambodia, where we saw a 73% reduction in the availability of minors in Phnom Penh, Siem Reap, and Sihanoukville. So when you enforce the law, the violence really does stop in these contexts. So how has COVID-19 affected our work, and how are we responding to this? Well, one thing that's happened is that there's been a big surge in violence in many countries around the world, including our own in Canada. The most vulnerable, however, in society are even more vulnerable to violence in lockdown, as we are at the moment. Governments and partners are reporting a major surge in violence because of this, as isolation goes on. While much of the world's focus is on health and economic impacts, there has been little attention really on bringing relief to those experiencing extreme violence. In Uganda, normally, and it's a horrific statistics, but normally 2 women a day are murdered in intimate partner violence, domestic abuse. At the moment, that statistic now is 5 women a day. So that is just gone up more than double. In Guatemala, we've seen a 35% increase in reports of children seeking help because they're in abused situations at home through a helpline. We've seen on OSEC, online sexual exploitation of children, or sometimes you hear it called cyber sex trafficking of children, lockdowns, and this new couch economy are driving the surging demand for cyber-enabled child abuse. And the combined economic loss and need for income, along with the elongated isolation, has created a perfect storm as criminals assume police are focused elsewhere. Slavery. Or forced labor slavery. State lockdowns are resulting in mass exodus of migrant workers, particularly in India and Southeast Asia. And because these migrants may not have bank accounts or job contracts, they are not eligible for emergency aid and are increased risk for trafficking and bonded labor to survive. Our team in India have warned that hundreds of millions of people in India are vulnerable because of the lockdown and because of economic reasons, which will drive desperate people to be trafficked into slavery. I've had an estimate. I just was told today when I was on a call with our director from India, who said that they estimate there's 1.5 million people at the moment stranded in India between the place where they worked and the place where they live. They're in no man's land and they've got no way of feeding themselves. And women, the violence against women and children. So during lockdowns, because protective networks are overwhelmed, there's a surge in violence against women and children. On average for 2017, 18 and 19, the Uganda Child Helpline received 248 calls per month. In March 2020, they received 881 calls, and recently the helpline received over 700 calls in one day, demonstrating this continuing escalation. So what's the response? Well, our COVID-19 response is to respond to the pandemic and surge in violence through our teams around the world. And so we're doing this in three ways. First of all, there's an immediate response which is needed, which is delivering COVID-19 relief right now. And you'll see that how a lot of the people we work with are, even those that have survived slavery, are still in very vulnerable situations in their work situation. They're still in places of poverty. And so there's a great need still amongst these people. Near term, we want to mobilize protection during lockdown. We are still doing rescues. Obviously, it's not as easy as it was, and you'll see examples of that in a little while. I'll show you how we have to be more creative with the way we do that. And long term, it's business as usual, equipping governments to end violence. And again, I'll show you some examples where actually COVID-19 has given us opportunities to basically build some good relationships with governments and with partners. So that will help in fighting violence in the future. So first of all, let's look at the COVID relief, which is the immediate care of people in poverty. So the survivors of violence, we continue to connect with many of our survivors through networks who also form support groups, but are often living and working in vulnerable situations. So in India, you can see a picture here of IGM and partners gathering to distribute hygiene kits to survivors in bonded labor struggling during the COVID-19 lockdowns. In Bangalore, released bonded laborers have shown the way by helping other rescued laborers who are suffering due to COVID-19 crisis. This has been a real opportunity for us to actually work with those that we've rescued. They're in a great position to then help other people because they know where they are and they can get to them. The secretary of one association visited a village where a large group of survivors were living, IGM survivors, and the help of a local NGO meant that they could distribute soaps to 40 families. They could explain how to use the soaps and the social distancing information, which doesn't get out to many people. Also give secured, they got provisions for 200 families, which were distributed, and given 120 families groceries across 3 villages, and many other things. So that's a key network for us, is the survivors of violence and their networks. Another area is just the vulnerable communities themselves. Our staff are connected to many vulnerable communities because of the work we do. So in Ghana, for example, the IGM aftercare team supported the community with food during lockdown. In India, there's a tribal community living in a forest reserve. They had no means by which to access food or health supplies. So IGM facilitated an outreach by the social service police branch, and members of a partner NGO provided grains and supplies to this community. Grocery kits were provided to 200 families, and this was the first joint venture. And again, this is one of these are kind of some of the positive things from COVID-19, but this was the first joint venture between a community and the police to reach out with essential food provisions to a tribal community, which is great. In the Philippines in April, the IGM Manila aftercare team provided support for 92 survivors who were financially affected by lockdowns. And in the DR, the Dominican Republic, we provided donations to 25 survivors of sex trafficking and their families to cover their food needs, as well as providing basic hygiene supplies, baby formula, wipes, diapers, and the such. Then we have our program partners, and these are local NGOs who we have trained and partner with to do the work of rescue, restoration, restraint, and rebuilding the justice system. In many areas, these local NGOs have been given access and permission from governments to reach out, and we're able to work with these NGOs and through these NGOs as well to help. So in Chiang Mai in Thailand, IGM and the local community network distributed hundreds of masks, hand gel and health education. In Bangalore, IGM staff worked with our NGO partners to distribute an additional 665 dry ration kits in several districts in southern India where survivors were living, including relief kits to 33 survivor families. And through our connections with the Telangana state government, we were able to do this. So it was, again, working with government, which was great. And an additional 370 ration kits were distributed to Bangalore City. The need is great, and these numbers aren't massive numbers. The need is far greater than what I'm saying. And then finally, government partners. This would include police, governors, state governors, politicians, aftercare, government aftercare, workers' facilities. In Kolkata, with much easier access, we have been able to equip women in the red light district. Obviously, the work in the red light district is zero, and there's a lot of people in desperate need of food. And so through the police partnership, we've been able to provide food for them and PPE equipment for the police. In Ghana, they couldn't emphasize enough the fact that we'd help them to reach out to their police again, providing PPE. So this is just a practical way we've been able to work with police in many countries, just giving them PPE. A lot of them just don't have the equipment. In Kenya, IGM donated 10 hand washing stations to police to show support for their efforts and the risks that they are being asked to take by government directives. And then in Kenya, our focus, our crime type there is police abuse of power, which of course is a very sensitive area because we are actually working with the police as well. But we've been able to foster good relationships with the police and our grassroots justice centres, which normally monitor the police abuse and help the survivor. So they're normally places of great tension, but because of what's happening at the moment, they've actually become a place of positive engagement with the police to work together to help during COVID-19. I've literally just come off a call with our director from India, which I mentioned a little while ago, and he was sharing that just 4 hours ago, there was one of these 1.5 million people who are stranded in no man's land. So they're working in Mumbai, they've got no work now, they've got nowhere to stay, they want to get home. Their home is 1,000 miles away. There were 20 migrants that were going to walk 1,000 miles to get to their home. Thankfully, we had a relationship with them, we had a relationship with the local police and the government there, so we were able to arrange for the government to transport them to their homes, which was fantastic. So that's just something that's happened 4 hours ago. So all these relationships you see, building these positive relationships with the police, the government partners, program partners, vulnerable communities in this way, has been actually a really positive thing for us during this COVID-19. And this will greatly help in the work going forward, way beyond the pandemic, which is great. So what about near-term mobilizing protection during lockdown? So we are still able to do rescues, and we are having to be a little bit more creative about that. And because of the limitations of not being able to actually meet and to go out, to any area. But this is a picture from the Philippines, and this happened in May. A rescue operation went forward, and it resulted in the arrest of this lady. She's a 41-year-old. And we managed to also rescue 3 children who were allegedly being sexually abused on webcams for paying customers in countries which are usually in countries like Canada and the US. The rescued victims were a 13-year-old boy, 2 girls aged 14 and 5. and they're now receiving trauma-informed care. All 3 of the minors rescued were children of this lady, the arrested suspect, which is quite common in this crime type in the Philippines. Another positive outcome that's come from this is that amazingly the inquiry, so putting forward all the evidence to the court, so that we could actually go in and enter to the property. It was all done online. This has never happened before. We also were given a digital warrant to go and search the home. This is very unusual because everything, and if you've traveled in developing world, you'll know this, a lot of things is done via paper. And so, especially when you deal with the lower courts, it's all paper. So to actually do something digitally is a real move forward and could have an impact going forward. And that's true. That's been a feature really of COVID-19. We've had lots of opportunities to kind of bring in online digital ways of doing things, which has just helped speed things up. So in Mumbai, we collaborated with a state women's commission known as the Wellbeing Volunteers United to explore opportunities to provide online counselling of victims of abuse during lockdown. So this is something that probably wouldn't have been thought of before. In Kenya, the first IGM case to be heard since the courts were closed in March came up over Zoom. This was a hearing for a class action suit filed alongside the widows and mums of 22 young men that were shot dead by police in Nairobi. The Attorney General is yet to file his submission as directed last year, and he was given 14 days to do so via email. The matter will next come up for highlighting of submissions on June the 15th, and with or without the Attorney General's submissions, it will go ahead. So again, this has been implemented online via Zoom, which would never have happened before. In Kolkata, most court cases now have halted. But in one court, a judge took up the bail application from one of 9 accused in a case from November. And this was a crucial leader in a trafficking ring who had exploited minors. So we really felt he needed to stay in custody. He shouldn't be released on bail. Judges were present in the courtroom, and the public prosecutors and staff had to connect via video conferencing to participate. Again, something that's just not happened before. And even though the public prosecutors couldn't access all their notes, they did a great job, and bail was ultimately rejected for this man. So again, these are just little changes that have been made which could impact things beyond the pandemic in a good way. So what are we doing here in Canada? How are we kind of connecting with people here and with you? You know, what are we asking of people? And I think one thing is the comment at the top there, to rally Canadians to solve the problem of violence against the poor. And that takes many different ways and many different levels of engagement. There's no one way to do that. But I think possibly the best starting point for that is advocacy, is really being a voice for the voiceless and just finding out about, you know, what is going on in the world around. Even the idea of slavery, for some people, they don't even know it exists. I've had people who have said, you know, slavery is not something that happens now. So just getting people to become more aware of what's going on. And you can do that through many organizations, but you can do that very easily through IGM. If you go onto hashtag IGM Canada on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, it'll open up to many things, many good videos, videos of rescues that we've done. We're currently about to launch a campaign called hashtag Unsafe in Lockdown, which is specifically focused on Filipino children who are being abused online for paying customers in the West. So that is, again, something about raising awareness, and you can donate to that as well. Obviously, fundraising is a big part of what we do in our partner offices, and I'm very sensitive to that at the moment because of where we're at with COVID-19, and many people haven't got the funds to be able to do that. So that's why finding out about the work is so important. But the Freedom Partner is our kind of regular giving, and that's really our bread and butter. That's the gift that we can promise because we know it's coming. So that's been really helpful for us during this time of COVID-19. People who are Freedom Partners who give regularly means that we can guarantee still that we're going to have funding for these different field offices. And also you can fundraise. I'm doing a fundraiser probably in a couple of weeks called We See You. And it's about, again, those children that are in lockdown who are being abused. And I'm going to do, I think, a kind of a drive-way greeting. So if you're interested to do that as well and kind of do it while I'm doing it, I can help you. But do reach out to me if you'd like to do fundraising for IGM in any way. We have another one in the summer called Just Move, which is great. I did 40 planks last year in 40 days, which was fantastic. I got really fit. And also corporately, for businesses, we are always looking for partnerships, and there are opportunities to fund a rescue from all the inquiring that takes place right through to the aftercare. Costs about 8,200 per person, per rescue. Sorry. So it's a lot of money, but you can fund a part of that. You don't have to do all of that. And that brings you into a partnership then with the field. And you can actually then also partner to fund a field office. And then there's many opportunities then to actually go on trips to the field, receive people from the field to here, and also have constant contact with the field as well. So that's a good opportunity where you can get really involved in the work. So there are just some of the ways that you can get involved. You can see my details on the left side there. If you want to reach out to me by email, by cell, please do. And if you've got any questions, please do ask them. I've not seen if there are questions, Jason, because I can't see if I take my PowerPoint off, I can probably see the chat.
Yeah, there's no questions in the chat, David, but this was a super informative presentation. I'm so glad that you were able to share this with all of us here today. And this particular presentation will be posted on our YouTube channel for others to consume and other members to consume at their leisure. I will ask anyone out there who's listening that you have any questions for David right now. This is a great opportunity for you to ask that to him. So I just make sure you're unmuted, and I'll give you a couple minutes or a couple seconds to ask a question if anything's top of mind for anyone. I know that
Hey, David, I have a question for you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Somewhat of a question and somewhat of a comment. I put a comment there in the chat about a book that I've been reading, audio book, Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point. Yeah. A big part of that book is, have you read it?
No, we talked about it. We've talked about it, but no, I haven't read it yet.
Yeah. So we did talk about a couple of days ago. I think I don't know if we spoke specifically about the part that I just listened on the book yesterday when I was cruising around the golf course. I had one earbud in, and I was listening to the book, and a part of it about crime and justice, and what is the tipping point that that allows crime to reduce. Yeah. Right. So I would challenge you to take a look at that book and see if you can find the audio or Malcolm Gladwell's kind of content in regards to how to reduce crime in that fashion. It's hard to describe. I'm not an expert, of course, in psychological reasoning, but is that something that you guys have kind of looked into? Like what I'm understanding is that there's patterns of how to manage this and how to make change, and they're very intentional. Is that the case?
Well, I mean, if I understand you correctly, so I think the situation is that people who do violence, who are the perpetrators of violence, they basically do it with impunity. So they've got absolutely no fear of being caught, and so they're empowered to be bolder and to do more horrific things. They'll do something and then they won't get caught. And it's the culture. There's a culture of impunity where basically they can get away with it. Yeah. So here's an example in Uganda, looking at property theft. We've been working there since 2004. So between 2004 and 2014, that's 10 years. Every single court case we had, we lost. We never got any prosecution on anybody. It would be seen as a disaster, but this is the nature of the work we do. It's very long term, and you've got to keep chipping away. And why is that? Because in 2014, we got one guy was sent to prison for what he did. One, over 10 years. Since that day, we've sent down 60. So it took that one. And we've seen that again and again in other contexts where there's such a culture of impunity that there's no fear of justice, that when suddenly justice comes, it sends a big shockwave out and people start to worry. And in a lot of these contexts, life in prison means life in prison. It's a long time. We've seen the same thing in Kenya regards to police abuse of power, where no policeman's ever been sent to prison. And so, you know, we're in a very, we've got a case at the moment. We lost one of our staff a few years ago who was murdered outside a courtroom along with another couple of a driver and an interpreter. And so that court case is ongoing. And there are a number of police who are, you know, in the dock for that. So, you know, this is something that we deal with. But I think once you get that one, it sends shockwaves around and of course, once you get the second, the third, the fourth, then it's actually the victims start to become empowered rather than the perpetrator. Yeah.
That's interesting, David. One thing I always knew of growing up, my dad always gave me this quote. He said, the devil's hands idle hands are the devil's playground, meaning that when there's nothing to do, like right now,
yeah,
people just do bad stuff, right? So that's got to be very challenging. I'm not sure if he spoke about this. I had to jump off for about 15 minutes, but
no.
Very interesting concept. Has that been a challenge that, you know, there's nothing to do anywhere? There's no sports, there's no activity, there's no outdoors.
Yeah, I mean,
and they're all locked up and cooped up inside with, like you said, with their, you know, it could be their abusive relationships.
Yeah, that's fueling a lot of the intimate partner violence. It's fueling the abuse against children. I got a statistic again just yesterday that 89%, there's been an 89% decrease in the abuse, the material that goes online of abusive material for children, in it being taken off. So you have lots of these. We have in Canada, we have a group called CyberTip that are fantastic, and they basically have a software called Arachnid, and it trawls the internet for abusive material of children. It tells the network providers to say, you know, you've got this on your network, you need to take it off, and they take it off. So you've got these kind of organizations all over the world. Well, there's been an 89% reduction in that stuff, that material being taken off. So it means you've got this massive more images than you had previously, and it's on there for longer. So that's fueling, of course, then perpetrators, predators, pedophiles who are at home on the computers far more. And yeah, like you say, idle hands, they'll be looking to kind of the two things propel each other. So yeah, it is a big issue, and that's why we've got this big campaign, #unsafe in lockdown. Do have a look at it on Facebook or on social platform, because it's really dealing with that issue. Yeah.
Well, in the interest of time, David, and you know, we're getting to the top of the hour here. I think it's best that we leave it there. Very informative, David. Amazing amount of information that you have, and I'm glad that you've got your contact information that you've shown, so that if anyone has any interest in anything else related to the subject matter, that you are certainly the expert to connect with, not only online but also next time you're in Launch. So with that, I will wrap up the talk for today, and I look forward to seeing everyone at our next talk. Thanks so much, guys.
Great. Thank you, guys.